Blue hour on dry mesa. Smoke scars the grass, a kerosene lamp sways at Clara Hayes's fence. She's 26, stubborn, alone, keeping a ranch alive with a ghost-pale mare and a windlass that creaks like a prayer. Last night she carried 2 wounded boys to the ridge and chose mercy. Today, Mason Blackwell rides in with papers, riders on the skyline, and a smile that says the well is his. The sheriff shrugs. Neighbors look away. Clara steadies a stone charm from her father and says, "Calm, water follows first use. At dawn the bucket will drop. Will courage and law outrun fear, or will fire and lies claim the valley?" Blue hour lay thin over dry mesa when Clara Hayes led the pale mare home. Dust still clung to her hem from the dead creek where she'd found the boys. They were maybe 16. One limped hard, one trembled. She had wrapped their shoulders in her old quilt, set them on the mare without a word, and walked them toward the ridge where the rocks turned red and the air felt watched. They had looked back at her with a fear that wasn't for her. She just nodded and said, "Go on. Keep to the high ground." They slipped into the dawn like deer. By noon, the story had grown legs. Folks in town said Clara had harbored riders and passed bred to danger. She heard it from the telegraph clerk who pretended not to stare, from Mrs. Voss at the store, whose voice dropped to a whisper when Clara bought lamp oil. By late afternoon, you could feel the talk in the road dust. Clara fixed her eyes on the chores. The windlass had been groaning lately. She poured a tin of water down the wood, let the rope drink, and set her shoulder into the crank. The bucket rose heavy and cold, the sound like a slow prayer. She watered the mare. She damped the sacks around the trough. She wrote down feed and nails and the state of the rope in her father's ledger, each line neat as fence pickets. The ledger buckle clicked shut like a promise. That was when Mason Blackwell rode up with 2 men behind him and a kerosene lamp swinging from his saddle horn. He was clean-shaven and pleased with himself, the kind of man who wore town polish over trail dust. He didn't take off his hat. He didn't look at the mare. "Afternoon, Miss Hayes," he said, voice pleasant as a front porch hymn. "I come as a neighbor." Clara kept one hand on the windlass handle. "Neighbors bring pie. You brought company." Blackwell smiled as if they were sharing a joke. He unrolled a paper that snapped in the breeze. "Petition for public safety. Folks are unsettled. I'm offering to assume stewardship of your well till tempers cool, for the good of dry mesa." "Stewardship," Clara said. "That the word for taking?" "The word for doing what you can't," he said, soft enough that only she could hear it. "You don't want more trouble, Miss Hayes. Not after last night." He pinned the notice to her gate with a brass tack, quick and tidy. One of his men, long jaw, red scarf, rode off a few yards and coiled a length of rope from her fence as if it were a tip he was owed. The other leaned down and put a boot on her windlass frame, nudging it with lazy pressure. The old wood creaked. "Careful," Clara said. "Inspector's touch," the man replied. The windlass knocked against its post. The rope shuddered. Clara looked at Blackwell. "Your inspection damage goes on my ledger." "Ledger won't help you," he said, still smiling. "Sheriff's letterhead will. Expect it." She watched them turn their horses and settle into that slow, confident trot men use when they believe the ground already belongs to them. She could have shouted. She didn't. She stood quiet until the lamp's flame vanished behind the willow bend. The sheriff came before sundown, hat low, hands folded over his belt as if they'd been put there by habit. Sheriff Dugan had a kind face that tired easy. "Clara," he said, eyes on the notice. "Best to keep the peace. Things are sensitive." "Water's water," she answered. "My father lined this well in the fall of '61. Tom Avery helped. If anyone wants to discuss peace, they can start there." Dugan sighed. "Blackwell says your place is a risk now, says strangers come and go, says decent folk are uneasy." "Decent folk are thirsty," Clara said. "You want a cup?" He looked past her at the windlass, the neat stack of wet sacks, the pale mare flicking flies. "No, ma'am." He tipped his hat and left the notice on the gate, as if it weighed more than his badge. Clara ate on the porch with the ledger open across her knees. She wrote down the words Sheriff Dugan used, and the pressure Blackwell's man put on the windlass arm, and the rope her fence had lost. The small details a court sometimes cares about when men don't. She pressed her father's stone charm into the page margin and let the impression hold. Night came thin and restless. Coyotes talked in the draws. Somewhere, a cowbell clanked, then stilled. Clara tied the mare close. She laid the family rifle across her legs and sat near the door with the lamp turned, low, listening to the bucket creak in the dark like an old ship on a slow ocean. A gust rattled the notice on the gate. She thought of the boys stepping into the ridge light and of how mercy thins a person's armor and thickens their spine. A hoof scraped stone far off, then another. She didn't move. She let the sound pass through her like weather. When sleep finally took her, it came in scraps and broken boards. Just before dawn, a colder wind rose from the east, catching the papers on her gate and the lamp smell in the air, and Clara understood. This wasn't only about a well, it was about who got to say what danger looked like. The bucket would drop at sunrise, and so would the first choice that mattered. By mid-morning the next day, a fresh paper carried Mason Blackwell's name from the courthouse to Clara's gate. It spoke in tidy lines about public safety and temporary stewardship, the same soft words he'd used with a harder edge. He'd added 3 new riders to his retinue, quiet men, with dust-dark coats, who took to lingering on the public road where her lane met the wash. They didn't block it. They didn't have to. Folks coming for water saw them and turned their wagons elsewhere. Fear does work without raising a hand. Clara fixed what she could touch. She pulled the windlass apart on the packed dirt yard, laid the arm across her knees, and shaved splinters where Blackwell's man had pried. She worked new pegs into the post, rubbed fat and tallow along the rope, and eased the bucket up and down until it moved like breath again. Then she opened her father's ledger, dated the page, and recorded the repairs in a hand that made jurors sit up straighter. Windlass arm abraded by forced leverage, rope fibers compressed, replaced pegs with mesquite, lubricated line. She underlined the word forced. She saddled the pale mare and rode to the claim shacks west of town, where old Tom Avery kept his prospecting tools hung like church bells on a wall. Tom was small and leathered, and smiled from under a hat brim that had seen rain in 3 states. "Morning, Miss Hayes," he said. "You come for iron, or you come for memory?" "Both," Clara answered. Blackwell posted that petition. Tom spat into the dust and nodded once. "Paper's heavy till you set it next to older paper. You got older paper?" "My father talked 61, she said. "Lined the well that fall." Tom's eyes warmed. "I had my hand on that rope." Preacher Jacob signed as witness. "Might be we can find what the county forgot to keep." He tapped a wooden crate, pulled out a folded strip of oilcloth, and unrolled a packet of survey scraps, notations in a tight, thorny script. "There's an iron pin by the cottonwood, east side of your quarter. If the pin's true, the meats run clean to your well. First water, first right, if the use never stopped. Law don't move water upstream to suit a new hat." On the ride back, they kept to the mesquite. A low wind carried the smell of last night's smoke from her fence. When they reached the rise over Clara's place, they stopped. On the far ridge, a small band had gathered, like brush-painted silhouettes against the sky. No one raised a rifle, no one waved. They waited, the way people wait when words are scarce and the next step matters. Clara dismounted and stood visible beside the windlass. She placed her father's stone charm on the post and kept her hands open. Tom shaded his eyes. "White Hawk," he said softly. "I figure that's him. We traded deer fat for coffee 3 winters ago. I know enough of his words to make a bridge, so long as we walk gentle." They did not call out. Instead, 2 younger riders came down part way and stopped beyond the fence, respectful of the line. The older man, broad-shouldered, hair braided smooth, rode the last bit alone. He dismounted without hurry and placed a bundle on the ground. Clara's old quilt, washed and folded, dried meat wrapped in leaves, a small jar of salve that smelled of pine and something wild. Tom lifted a hand. "Thanks you for the boys," he translated, slow. "Says one is his sister's son. Says your horse is strong. Says you walked beside." Clara met the man's gaze and nodded. They were hurt. I had room. Tom listened to White Hawk's answer, head tilted, then found the words. "He says mercy is a kind of rope. You hold one end, they hold the other." Clara set the bundle on her porch and brought coffee. 2 cups for guests, 1 for Tom. She poured clean water at the trough, then stepped back so White Hawk could see the bucket rise, honest and clear. The wind shifted, and the rope hummed against the wood like a low note. "We have trouble," Clara said. "A man wants this well." Tom spoke it to Whitehawk in the pieces he knew. The older man studied the windlass and the circle of wet earth at its base. Then the riders posted on the public road. He said a few words, steady and spare. Tom translated. "He will leave 2 watchers on the ridge at night, not to fight, to see. Eyes are better than rumors," Clara breathed out, something between gratitude and caution. "Tell him I write everything down. If there's a fair way through, I'll take it. If there's a lawful way to share, I'll learn it." Tom passed it along. Whitehawk listened, and, for the first time, smiled, a quick light behind a weathered face. He touched the quilt with 2 fingers, the way a man touches a memory, then mounted and rode back to the ridge. The younger riders touched their hands to their chests and followed, silent as dusk. By evening, the petition on Clara's gate had gathered dust at its edges. The 3 hard cases still watched the road. Old Tom knelt by the cottonwood and dug with his old knife until the iron pin winked up from the roots like a fact that refused to rust. Clara set the ledger on her porch railing, wrote the pin's bearing and the angle of Tom's shadow, then closed the buckle with a soft click. A breeze slid down from dry mesa and set the well rope thrumming again. Somewhere beyond the rim, a horn answered, once and fell quiet. Clara rested a hand on the windlass and felt the line's faint vibration. Warning or promise, she couldn't yet tell. Old Tom's knife clicked against something solid at the cottonwood's roots. He brushed aside soil with careful fingers, the way a man handles truth he expects to prove him right. Iron winked up dull and stubborn. The survey pin he'd sworn was there. "There she is," Tom said, voice low. 61 line. I watched them set it before the war turned everything sideways. Clara crouched beside him and pressed her thumb to the cold metal. The wind off dry mesa carried dry grass and a taste of ash from the burned fence line. On the far ridge, Whitehawk's 2 watchers sat their horses like stone, present but polite, the way neighbors stand a step back while you sort your own affairs. "If the pin's true," Tom went on, "your quarter runs 20 chains past the well. First use follows the ground, not rumor." "Blackwell will say paper beats memory," Clara answered. Tom grinned without mirth. "Then we'll bring older paper." They rode to Clara's cellar while the sun leaned west. It smelled of earth and apples and old work. Against the back wall stood a trunk her father had built from scrap boards. It had a sliver of tin nailed as a hasp, and a worn place where his thumb had worried the lid. Each winter he counted flour and seed. Clara fetched the ledger from the porch and set it on the trunk. The brass clasp clicked open. She rifled forward to this year's neat entries: repairs, feed, the forced lever on the windlass, then back through her father's hand, dense and upright. Planting dates, a list of calves, a single line that halted her breath. Well lined, October 61, witness, T. Avery, affidavit prepared, see folded page. "Folded page," she murmured. She lifted the ledger's backboard. Beneath it, a thin slot ran the length of the spine. Her fingers found paper that felt different, rag fiber, not store-bought. She eased it out. The page had browned at the bow. Edge's walnut ink had sunk into the grain and held its color. At the top, in her father's careful script, statement of first appropriation, Hayes Quarter, Dry Mesa. Below, clear words set their stake in time. Date, season, depth of the lined shaft, the basalt seam, the first bucket drawn with Old Tom and Preacher Jacobs standing witness. A final line, underlined once. Use continuous from first draw. Tom's breath left him like a laugh that was tired of waiting. "Mercy, girl, that there's the old law in ink." Clara read it twice more, lips moving. "He never filed. Paper doesn't lose its truth because a clerk never saw it," Tom said. "But a clerk and a clock can bless it public. We'll need the county surveyor. Sunrise measure, clean as a hymn. Flow rate at first light. That's when seeping water tells the least lies." Clara held the affidavit up to the cellar window. Light marked the fibers and the path of her father's pen. She felt again the small weight of his stone charm in her pocket, and understood why he'd given both. The charm for courage, the paper for court. "What about Blackwell's deed?" she asked. Tom scratched his jaw. "We pace it when the surveyor's here. If it reaches where he says, we'll see it. If it falls short, we'll see that too. Either way, we put truth on the ground where folks can't pretend not to notice." They climbed from the cellar into a late sun that gilded the windlass arm and made the bucket's iron ring glow. Clara laid the affidavit flat on the table and smoothed the corners, then folded it into the ledger like a letter you keep near your heart. On the porch rail, she wrote, "Located pin at Cottonwood, east boundary. Witness T. Avery, affidavit recovered, father's hand, to file at county office." She let the ink dry while the rope hummed. "Preacher Jacobs?" she asked. Tom nodded. "Alive and right enough? He'll remember. Pastors don't lose track of water, or babies baptized out of it." They rode to town after supper, steady and visible. Blackwell's. 3 men watched from the wash with the patience of bad weather. No one reached for iron. Clara gave them nothing to use. She tied the mare outside the courthouse and climbed the steps with the ledger under her arm, feeling its weight like a promise and a dare. Inside, the clerk, a narrow fellow with eyebrows that never agreed, looked at the page and at Clara's straight shoulders and at old Tom's hat that had seen rain in 3 states. He coughed, dabbed his pen, and made space on the counter. "Sunrise," Clara said. "Surveyor present. Public measure. Surveyor's out at McCready's ditch till dawn," the clerk mumbled. "But he'll be here come first light. You want it posted notice?" "Post it," Clara said. "Let everyone who drinks here see what time looks like." When they walked back into the bluing evening, a small figure detached from the shadows near the jail. Preacher Jacobs, thinner than she remembered, tipped his hat with hands that held a tremor and a steadiness at once. "I signed that. Paper," he said. "I'll sign again." Clara thanked him and pressed his name into the ledger neat as fence pickets. The sky over Dry Mesa darkened to indigo. On the ridge, 2 quiet silhouettes kept their watch. On the road, Blackwell's riders sat their saddles without moving, waiting for the kind of victory that arrives when no one pushes back. Clara touched the stone charm, felt the shape of her father's faith, and looked past the riders to the place where the sun would climb. At dawn, the county's clock and the earth's slow seep would speak the same language, or they wouldn't. Either way, the rope would answer. The churchyard filled slow as a creek, folks drifting between trestle tables and shade. Children chased each other around a wagon stacked with hymnals. The bell rope hung still. Clara arrived late, ledger tucked under her arm, hat pinched tight against the rising wind. Old Tom walked beside her, his gait easy, eyes cutting a quiet survey line through the crowd. Preacher Jacobs stood near the lemonade barrel, pale as the napkin in his hand, but steady. He nodded when he saw Clara, then squeezed her fingers with a tremor that belonged to time, not fear. "Glad you came," he said. "Light loves the open." Mason Blackwell chose his moment the way a gambler chooses a seat. He stepped up on a bench with a picnic plate in one palm and a folded petition in the other. "Friends," he called, pleasant, practiced, "I won't sour a good Sunday, but we can't pretend danger ain't in our valley." Heads turned because danger is a word that brings its own echo. Blackwell raised the paper as if it were a lantern. "We've all heard about Miss Hayes and the visitors." A pause, thin smile. "Decent folks lose sleep when strangers cross a line. For safety, I'm offering stewardship over her well until this confusion clears. Temporary, lawful, for the common good." A soft murmur slipped through the yard. Curiosity, worry, relief at the shape of someone else's decision. Sheriff Dugan stood near the pie table, jaw set, hat brim low enough to show he wished the ground would settle this for him. Clara stepped onto the grass where everyone could see. She didn't climb a bench. She didn't lift her voice past what the bell rope could hear. "Water follows first use," she said. "My father lined that well in the fall of '61. Old Tom witnessed. Preacher Jacobs signed. We have the affidavit." She held up the ledger. The wind flipped a page like a patient turning over in sleep. Blackwell shook his head, gentle enough to look kind. "Paper at home is not paper at court, Miss Hayes." Old Tom spoke up, hat in hand. "Then let's take it to court's front step. County surveyor at sunrise. Flow measured clean. Meets paste on your deed, Mr. Blackwell. Right there where the light can find the corners we're all talking about." Blackwell kept smiling, but the corners of his mouth grew tired. "We can't invite strangers to that kind of proceeding. Feelings run high. I aim to keep order," Preacher Jacobs lifted, his voice thin but carrying. "Order is born from truth. If truth belongs to you, Mr. Blackwell, it'll not mind being seen." A movement drew eyes to the far fence. 3 riders were there at the edge of the yard's comfort, White Hawk in the middle, 2 younger men holding back a length. They didn't dismount. They didn't touch iron. Whitehawk rode forward 1 horse length, then placed a wrapped bundle on the nearest wagon. Roasted meat in leaves, laid like a neighborly word spelled without ink. Old Tom stepped half a pace toward him, chin raised. He didn't translate yet. He didn't need to. Whitehawk met Clara's eyes across the open and dipped his head once, slow. The yard held its breath. No one reached for fear. Even the children stood still. Clara took 1 step toward the bundle and spoke so both edges could hear. I carried 2 hurt boys out of a dry creek. I'd do it again. Mercy ain't a gate to theft. It's a proof a person can be trusted. A woman near the pies, Mrs. Voss, found her. Voice. My youngest drank from that schoolyard spring one winter when we had no barrel. If the measure shows it flows from Miss Hayes's ground first, I say, let the law say so. Sheriff Dugan shifted his weight, then squared his shoulders to the yard. Surveyor Ellery will be at Miss Hayes's place at first light, he said. Public measure. Anyone who drinks from our wells can stand quiet and watch. Blackwell held his petition mid-air, as if uncertain which way the wind blew. He turned slightly, enough to bring the sheriff into his smile. Of course, if it settles talk. Talk's not the thing that needs settling, Tom muttered, mostly to himself. Clouds banked over dry mesa, blue-gray with a seam of iron. A gust set the hymn pages fluttering and lifted the kerchiefs of 3 girls who would remember this day for years. Whitehawk murmured to the younger riders. They eased back to the fence line, a respectful distance, scouts in no one's way and in everyone's sight. Clara closed the ledger, the core, clasp clicking like a small verdict. She felt her father's stone charm warm in her pocket and the day's breath cool on her cheek. Around her the crowd adjusted, postures straightening, whispers thinning, a few nods like fence posts driven deeper. Blackwell climbed down from the bench and lit a small lamp he'd brought for shade under the tables, he said, though the sun was not yet gone. The lamplight wobbled in the wind, throwing his shadow long across the grass. He gave Clara a smile honed thin as wire. See you at dawn. Bring your deed, she answered. Bring witnesses. Bring your patience. Somewhere up valley, thunder rolled like a wagon crossing a plank bridge. The bell rope stirred without a hand on it. People began to pack plates and fold blankets, talking low, eyes sliding toward the eastern rise where the morning's truth would walk in on time. Clara stood a while longer, feeling the weight of what she'd asked for, and the steadiness of asking it. When she finally turned for home, the wind carried the faintest scent of rain, and the first cool drop found the ledger's leather. One small sign that the valley might yet break its dry spell. At the same hour, the law tried to do right. Dawn, she thought. Let the bucket speak where the mouth cannot. Clara was at the courthouse door before the janitor turned the key. The ledger lay open on the counter, her father's affidavit spread like a map of a future she meant to reach. The clerk read each line twice, slower the second time, and stamped the filing with the deliberate thud of a man who knew the sound would carry. Posted in the morning registry, he said. Surveyor Ellery will attend at first light, as noticed. Thank you, Clara answered. She copied the citation number into the ledger, squared the corners of the paper, and tied the brass clasp. When she stepped back into the street, the sun had only cleared the livery roof. Blackwell's men watched from the wash with the patience of thorns. At home, she nailed a neat, wooden placard to the windlass post. Affidavit of first appropriation filed this day. Sunrise measure to be witnessed. She ringed the trough with wet burlap sacks, set a shovel and 2 blankets close, and moved her kindling box away from the fence. Old Tom arrived with a length of iron he'd hammered into a simple hook. Together they fixed a brace under the windlass arm where the prying had scarred it. Small things add up, Tom said, straightening. So do small lies given daylight. Clara nodded and wrote the brace into the ledger. If tomorrow is clean, it will be because today was careful. Evening slid down from dry mesa with a sky the color of pewter. Clara cooked beans and onions and carried a plate to the fence line for Whitehawk's watchers. A quiet courtesy passed back and forth without talk. She doused lanterns early, checked the burlap for damp, and laid the rifle across her lap by the door. She didn't want it. She wanted time to move like water, steady and visible. The first hiss came just before midnight, soft as a snake at grass level. Then the flicker, a low orange tongue testing the fence where the wind had banked dry weeds. Clara was already moving, toe to heel, breath measured. At the corner post she found a kerosene splash climbing the boards and a rag that glowed. She kicked the rag clear, threw a wet sack over the ember, and thumped it with the flat of the shovel. Shadow moved beyond the fence, two shapes slipping along the brush like men who had practiced not being seen. One tossed another bottle. Glass broke short of the garden, the hiss sharper, flames licking toward her bean rows. Clara didn't shout. She set her feet, raised the rifle, and snapped two shots low, precise, not at flesh, at stirrups. The ring of metal was clean as a bell. Hoofbeats stumbled, then righted. The shapes flinched, melted back toward the wash. A horn sounded once from the ridge, not an alarm so much as a sentence that didn't need the last word. Riders flowed down the slope. Like the dark itself had decided to take a side. They didn't charge. They fanned. They dismounted with blankets and shovels, beating flame with practiced rhythm, smothering the hungry crackle before it learned to run. Whitehawk himself trod the fence line, face calm, eyes fixed on where the fire was trying to breathe. Old Tom came puffing with two more wet sacks and a bucket he sloshed in a cheerful defiance that almost made Clara smile. "You mind if I water your weeds?" he said. "Be particular," she answered, and he was. It didn't take long, which is the thing about fires answered early. The burlap steamed, the fence smoked like a scolded child. Clara bent to lift a charred board and felt the heat singe her palm through the glove. She set it aside, breath steadying. Across the wash, a single match flared and died, too far to be after work, close enough to be a message. Mason Blackwell's voice slid across the dark with a pleasantness that insulted the night. "Brave showing," he called, "but a crowd won't always be watching." Clara didn't answer. The sheriff would want what she had more than what she felt. She set the rifle down, went to the porch, opened the ledger, and wrote, "Midnight, attempt to ignite fence at east corner, kerosene rag and bottle, recovered. 2 riders in brush, warning shots aimed at iron only, no injury intended, community present, Whitehawk and 3, Tom Avery, fire suppressed within minutes." She pressed her father's stone charm into the margin, leaving the faintest oval in damp ink. Whitehawk stepped beside her, quiet as a pine. Tom translated the few words he spoke. "He says watch will hold through dawn. He says wind carries talk, but eyes carry truth." Clara looked at the fence, at the garden's singed edge, at the pale mare shifting calm in the stall, as if the world were still mostly ordinary. "Tell him I'm grateful," she said. "Tell him I'll make coffee at first light." Clouds thinned. Stars returned like nails in a strong roof. One by one, the shoo. Riders climbed back to the ridge. Tom settled on the porch step with the shovel across his knees, as if he had always meant to nap that way. Clara stayed a long while in the doorway, listening to the rope give a small, contented hum as the night cooled. She could almost feel tomorrow's clock already walking toward her, steady and fair. Somewhere in the wash, a pebble shifted, and she thought of Blackwell's voice and what a man might do when he believed no one would see. "Dawn," she told herself, and felt her heart take the pace of the word. "Dawn will measure what tonight only guessed." By noon, the day after the fire, when the ash smell still clung to Clara's fence and the burlap sack steamed in thin sunlight, a deputy rode up slow and official. Deputy Harlan had a careful beard and a way of looking at your shoulder instead of your eyes. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice polite as a ticket window, "you'll need to come along. Complaint's been sworn, disorderly conduct, discharging a firearm within proximity of citizens." Clara wiped her hands on her skirt and set the ledger on the porch rail. "I fired at iron, not men. Ask the stirrups." "Not my ask to make," Harlan said, cheeks coloring. "Judge will see you in the morning." She tied the pale mare to the post and glanced toward the ridge where Whitehawk's watchers sat small as thumbprints against the sky. "I'll return by dawn," she told herself more than the deputy. She locked the cabin and climbed into the wagon without fuss, letting the dust of the lane carry her answer for now. Word beat them to town. Mason Blackwell was already on the boardwalk when the wagon pulled up. Deed rolled crisp in his palm. He didn't look at Clara. He showed the paper to whoever would pause. Mrs. Voss, the telegraph clerk. A pair of hands from the livery, tapping a neat finger against a section and range like it were scripture. "Order, folks," he said. "We all sleep better with order." Sheriff Dugan stood in the shade near the jail, jaw set. He took Clara's belt and the small knife she used for twine, movements as gentle as a man undressing a hurt child. "I'll keep it until morning," he said. Judge Harwood on the bench at sunup. Likely release on your word. My word is worth more than this, she said, meaning the cell door. He nodded and looked away. The cell was rough stone and iron. No cruelty, just absence. Clara sat on the narrow bunk and let the quiet settle around her like a too small blanket. She pictured Tom at the cottonwood pin, counting paces. White Hawk's watchers, eyes learning the curve of every rumor. The windlass arm, braced and ready. The ledger, open on the porch rail as if pages could keep watch. Late afternoon, old Tom appeared at the bars with a tin cup that steamed and a pencil stuck behind his ear. Judge won't see you till morning, he said, but paper will see me now. He held up a scrap. Blackwell let me read his deed like it was a sermon. He likes an audience. I copied what a man ought to remember. Clara gripped the bars. What does it say? Section 31, Township 9, Range East, Tom replied, eyes bright. Miss Hayes, that line don't touch your well by a half section. The way it's drawn, he could water a mule at the wash and call it charity, but he can't claim what he can't reach. Clara let her breath out slow. Will the survey show it clean? Clean as a hymn, Tom said, provided you're standing there to ask the right questions. A shadow moved at the door, soft as a moth. White Hawk himself did not enter. He stayed in the street, honoring lines. But a boy slipped in, set a bundle on the floor by the cell, and vanished as if the light itself had swallowed him. Tom opened the bundle, a folded slice of roasted meat, 2 corn cakes, a twist of salt. No note, no need. Tell him thank you, Clara said. Tom lifted the food, sniffed, smiled. He already knows. Evening came with a skiff of clouds and the soft restlessness of a town choosing who to be. Blackwell walked the boardwalk once, more with his lamp, flame steady in the wind. He held the deed up to the glass and admired it the way some men admire themselves. Tomorrow, he told no one and everyone, but we'll have order. Sheriff Dugan brought a blanket and an apology that had nowhere to land. I can't fix this tonight, he said, but the judge is fair. Fair's the thing I came for, Clara answered. She lay down on the narrow bunk with her boots on and clenched her father's stone charm inside her fist until the edges printed into her skin. She slept in pieces, the way you sleep in a station house, half listening, half remembering. Before dawn, keys scraped, soft and hurried. Judge Harwood himself stood in the hallway with his hat in his hands like a man inside his own prayer. Miss Hayes, he said, you're released on your recognizance. Bring your affidavit. Be present at your measure. If there's gunplay again, I'll hear it from the iron, not the rumor. Yes, Your Honor, Clara said, voice even. She stepped onto the street just as the sky went from coal to ash. Mason Blackwell leaned on the lamppost, coat collar high, smile thin. He lifted his paper between 2 fingers, a man toasting his own reflection. See you at dawn, he said. Bring your deed, Clara told him. Bring your patience. She climbed onto the wagon. Old Tom swung up beside her with his pencil and his stubborn hope. The road to Dry Mesa blued ahead, and somewhere beyond, a rope waited to sing the truth. Dawn gathered like breath held too long. Frost silvered the windlass, and Clara warmed her hands on a coffee pot while the yard filled in quiet rings. Old Tom at the cottonwood pin, Preacher Jacobs in his black coat, Sheriff Dugan near the gate. Families came soft-footed, hats in hands, the way folks enter a church when they mean to listen. On the far ridge, 2 small figures kept their patient watch. White Hawk stood midway down the slope, present but outside any claim. Surveyor Ellery arrived with a folding rod, a brass clock, and the practiced calm of a man who liked numbers more than stories. He nodded to Clara, to the sheriff, and even to Mason Blackwell, who had polished his smile to courtroom shine and brought 2 men in dust-dark coats. Proceed? Ellery asked. By the notice, Clara said, offering the ledger. Ellery read the filing stamp, the affidavit heading, the walnut ink her father had laid down 14 years earlier. He touched the page with 2 fingers, not sentimental, respectful. Flow before talk, Ellery said, setting his clock on a crate. Miss Hayes, lower your bucket at my mark. Clara wrapped the rope once around the cleat and waited. Ellery watched the second hand climb. Now! The windlass croaked once and then ran smooth, the bucket slipping into the basalt cool dark. When it touched, Clara felt the rope ease, the old well answering like a living thing. Ellery tipped his head. Raise. Water rose silver blue, clear as a bell tone. He measured volume and time with tidy motions, recorded the rate, then crouched to watch the seep replenish, a slow, bright wound healing itself. Continuous, he said. At dawn, sufficient for household and stock. Prior use will bind if proved. Old Tom stepped forward with the affidavit. Signed by Hayes, witnessed by me and Preacher Jacobs, fall of 61. Preacher lifted his trembling hand. I signed that day. I'll sign your ledger again if you need a new ink for old truth. Blackwell's smile didn't move. Paper in a private book lacks authority. The county never stamped it. The county is stamping it now by notice, Ellery said, mild as a schoolmaster. And Sunrise belongs to everyone. He closed the ledger, handed it back, and tapped his rod. Next, the meets named in Mr. Blackwell's deed. Where your paper walks, sir, I will follow. Blackwell produced his deed like a magician palming silk. Ellery unfolded it, frowned at the legal description, then faced the cottonwood. He sighted the sun, set his compass, and began to pace, chains across the yard, over the wash, toward a low bench of rock. Tom followed, counting under his breath. Several men joined, curiosity pulling them, as steady as gravity. At 40 chains, Ellery stopped. He drove a small stake and checked his angle. Per deed, the corner lies here. Clara's well stood back across a shoulder of ground, a good stretch away. Murmurs rose. Mrs. Voss put a hand to her mouth. Sheriff Dugan's chin lifted, as if a weight had slid from it. Blackwell's smile thinned, but did not break. Recheck your instrument, he said. This land confuses old men. Ellery recited and paced again, slower. He came up on the same stake and tapped it with the end of his rod. Half section shy, he announced. Your boundary doesn't reach Miss Hayes' well. It never did. Silence held for a heartbeat. Then the long-jawed rider in Blackwell's coat shifted in his saddle, as if the truth had wormed a stone into his boot. He cleared his throat. We only followed orders, he said to no one in particular, then to everyone. The windlass. When we leaned on it the first day, he told us to make it squeak. The yard stilled. Blackwell didn't turn, but his jaw set hard. You misunderstand, Cal, he murmured. Cal's eyes flicked between the sheriff and the crowd. You said inspect like a wink. The lady wasn't wrong. We weren't careful. Sheriff Dugan stepped forward, voice even. Mr. Blackwell, did you direct men to tamper with Miss Hayes' equipment? Blackwell adjusted his cuffs. Sheriff, watch your reach. I said nothing unlawful. Men do clumsy things when nerves are high. Preacher Jacobs spoke, fragile and firm at once. Clumsy doesn't pick a brass tack for another person's gate. A whip of wind rattled the notice there, the sound like a verdict landing. Ellery closed his clock and tucked away his rod. Measure stands, flow stands, description stands. By my office, Miss Hayes' prior use is supported by evidence. Any further claim will need new law or new land. Clara felt the tightness in her chest, unknot by one notch. She looked to the ridge. Whitehawk's gaze met hers, and he gave the smallest nod, an agreement without debt. Blackwell lifted his lamp. He'd brought it even in daylight, like a habit, and its flame wobbled in the morning breeze. The county will hear of this, he said, voice buttered again. And property disputes have more than one reading. Sheriff Dugan took out his notebook. They also have penalties when men make fire in dry grass. Near the fence, Old Tim found the rag left from the night's attempt and set it on a crate, proof that did not need a speech. Mrs. Voss pointed at the garden's singed edge. A murmur became a shape the yard could stand behind. Ellery looked from stake to well to sheriff. My part's done, he said. Yours may be starting. Blackwell turned slightly, searching faces for the old tilt of easy favor, and finding instead people standing upright in their own names. He lowered the lamp, and for the first time the smile did not fit him. Clara eased, the ledger open, and wrote a single line. Sunrise measure, flow clean, deed short, rider admits tamper. She pressed her father's stone charm into the margin. The oval remained like a seal. The wind shifted, carrying a trace of rain from the high country. Someone exhaled as if they had been holding their breath since winter. Sheriff Dugan cleared his throat, eyes on Blackwell. Mason, we'll finish this in town. Blackwell didn't move. Then he laughed, pleasant, as always, but there was no place for it to land. We shall see, he said. Clara wrapped the rope once more around the cleat and felt the well's answer rise through her palms, steady, unafraid. She looked toward the schoolyard where children had drunk 2 winters ago, and thought of what Tom still hadn't shared from the ledger's back pages. Because the valley had one more truth to hear, and it would change the shape of mercy. Sheriff Dugan closed his notebook and looked at Mason Blackwell like a man weighing a bridge before he stepped on it. The kerosene rag lay plain on the crate. The garden's singed edge drew a dark line across mourning. Surveyor Ellery's stake sat where the deed ran out, and pride had pretended to go farther. "Mason," Dugan said, voice steady, "you're coming with me. Attempted arson, fraud by false claim, tampering by direction." He paused. "You'll have your day, but you'll have it from the inside." Blackwell's lamp quivered in his hand, a small flame hunting shelter. "Sheriff," he said lightly, "be careful with big words. This valley needs order. It needs honesty first," Dugan answered. The long-jawed rider, Cal, leaned forward on his saddle, guilt drawing him thin. "Sheriff, I'll swear to what he told us. We weren't careful because he said not to be." Blackwell turned, the smile finally cracking. "You never were worth 2 bits of—" "Enough," Preacher Jacobs broke in, fragile voice cutting like a fine saw. "An honest yes is all a man has when his shine is gone." Dugan took Blackwell's lamp, pinched the big flame, and handed the cooled handle to a deputy. He didn't bind Blackwell's wrists. He set a hand just above the elbow, a firm escort a man has to resist if he means to fight. Blackwell glanced around, seeking his old reflection in other people's eyes, and finding only faces gone plain with decision. Clara eased the ledger open, hands sure now, and wrote, "Sheriff arrests Mason Blackwell, attempted arson, fraud, tamper order admitted by Rider Cal, witnesses, Ellery, Jacobs, Voss, townsfolk." She pressed her father's stone charm to the margin. The oval sank into damp ink, a quiet stamp a court could not ignore. "Before you go," old Tom called, voice bright as a strike on an anvil, "there's one more piece." He tapped the ledger's backboard and slid out a thin, brittle note Clara hadn't seen. "Your mother's hand," Tom said to her, softening, "told you there was sense beneath your father's neat." He unfolded the scrap, walnut ink again, but smaller, a woman's careful measure of the world. Overflow stone set, north of well, low under basalt seam. Channels seep to shelf spring above schoolyard. Winter of 72, water there when barrels failed. Do not disturb stone, it keeps children. Preacher Jacobs closed his eyes, memory landing. 2 winters back, he whispered, we counted cups for the small ones. Some lived on that trickle. We called it Providence because we had no map for mercy in rock. Ellery took the note like a man touching a relic. A capped overflow, he said, thinking aloud. Basalt seam, unlined channel. If the stone holds the line, the source is continuous, first on Hayes Quarter, then to town by gravity. Prior use extends by proof of the path, not the rumor of it. He looked up. In plain words, her careful keeping kept you. Mrs. Voss pressed a hand to her chest. A couple of ranch hands stared toward the schoolyard, as if hearing thirsty ghosts thank them by name. Cal took off his hat and held it low. Clara swallowed, the truth landing deeper than pride. She pictured her mother's hand steadying that stone, quiet as bread set to rise. We didn't boast, she said. We meant to fix it proper and file it. Life moved, chores moved. The valley drank and forgot to ask from where. Whitehawk stepped down from his horse and came to the fence, stopping a yard shy of its line. He spoke a few words. Tom listened, then gave them shape. He says water is a road if hands don't turn it cruel. He offers a simple way. Shared watch at night, 2 from his band, 2 from town, you choosing the pairs. He says mercy that saved boys saved children before, and the ground remembers. A quiet rippled through the yard, something like shame, something like relief. Sheriff Dugan nodded toward Whitehawk. I'll sign my own hours to that watch, he said. I reckon I owe both sides for choosing slow truth. Clara ran her thumb along the ledger's edge. I'll make a new page, she said, voice steady. Shares and hours. What's drawn and when. Names clear. If there's dispute, we open the book before we open our mouths. Blackwell gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You think a woman with a farm book and a few church whispers can set law? No, Clara said quietly. But a woman with first use, a filed affidavit, a surveyor's word, a preacher's memory, and a valley's children can. Dugan tipped his hat to Clara, then to Whitehawk, then took Blackwell by that gentleman's elbow again. "Let's go," he said. As they started down the lane, rain's smell came sudden and honest, riding a breeze off dry mesa. The first drop hit the windlass arm and slid along the brace Tom had set, bright as a promise. Whitehawk's watchers shifted on the ridge, easy now. Mrs. Voss wiped at tears she pretended were weather. Clara tied the stone charm to the windlass handle with a strip of leather, the oval knocking once, twice, like a soft bell. "We'll start the watch at dusk," she said. "We'll start the ledger now." Old Tom sharpened his pencil with his pocket knife, the shavings falling neat. Children's voices drifted faint from the schoolyard, where a thin spring had kept faith when men argued. Clara lifted the bucket, heard the rope sing its plain hymn, and felt the valley settle into a new shape, one held not by fear, but by hands that chose to keep. And yet, even as the rain came, she knew a valley doesn't change on paper alone. It changes in what you do. Next, rain came honest for 3 days, not a flood, just a steady hand on the valley's shoulder. Smoke smell left the fence. Soot ran into the wash and turned the water the color of weak coffee. Clara set a fresh page in the ledger and titled it simple, Shares and Hours. She wrote slow, neat, names first, then what they gave and what they drew. Mrs. Voss brought 2 barrels for the schoolhouse. Preacher Jacobs offered mornings to mind the trough while he memorized his sermon lines. Sheriff Dugan signed for the midnight watch, beside Whitehawk's mark. 2 names bracketed together like a single promise. Old Tom hammered new, rails where the fire had nipped the fence, humming a hymn that didn't need all its words. Cal, the long-jawed rider, showed up with a sack of nails and a face that had learned what shame feels like from the inside. He kept his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he said, "I got coin for the boards I helped ruin. It wasn't all my thinking, but it was my boot." Clara looked at him for a breath. "Put your money toward the school spring," she said. "Bring your hands here." Cal swallowed, then nodded, relief landing like rain on dust. He worked until his palms went raw and never asked for thanks. Whitehawk came most evenings. He stood outside the fence and sipped coffee, the way a man listens to a story he's heard before, but still respects. His 2 watchers shifted the night in even turns, their silhouettes steady against the ridge. When Clara set a lantern on the porch, she placed it low so the light wouldn't argue with stars. They traded small words through Tom, or through patience. The kind of words that last, water, night, children, keep. Mason Blackwell sat in the county jail while the judge sorted affidavits from smoke. No one cheered when the bars took him. Towns that cheer at cages forget how quick a lock can swing the other way. Folks just kept busy with the work that outlives gossip. When Blackwell's lawyer tried to stir talk, he found little left to stir. The survey spoke. The deed fell short. Cal's statement stood up like a fence post in good ground. On the 4th morning, Clara rode the pale mare to the schoolyard spring. Children leaned their cups under a thin, faithful run that the overflow stone guided like a hand. A boy with a cowlick grinned up at her, mouth wet. "Tastes like a penny," he said. "That's the basalt talking," Old Tom told him, solemn as a judge. "It's how rocks remember." Preacher Jacobs set a bench in the shade and bowed his head. "Some mercies come roaring," he said to Clara later. "Some come as a trickle that never quits." They planned the watch schedule. On the church steps where everyone could hear. 2 from town, 2 from Whitehawk's camp. Names paired across lines that had felt high the week before. Sheriff Dugan took the midnight turn because he wanted the hardest hour. Clara chose the dawn hour because she trusted the language of rope and bucket best when the world was cool. When someone asked who would keep the ledger, she didn't lift her hand. She set the book on the steps and read the names already written. No one argued with seeing themselves in ink. That evening, with the wind making a low-hum tune through the cottonwood leaves, Cal walked up holding a small wooden box. "Found this near the wash," he said. "A brass tack and a scrap of your notice from that first day. Figured you'd want proof that traveled." Clara placed the tack in the ledger's pocket beside her father's affidavit. "Proof that left and came back is still proof," she said. "So are hands that do better once they know how." He nodded and stepped off the porch, lighter than he'd climbed it. When the stars settled, Whitehawk approached the fence, stopping at his usual yard of respect. He spoke a few words. Tom translated with a smile that reached his eyes. He says the water is safer now because the book makes kin out of watchers. Clara lifted the windlass handle. She had tied her father's stone charm there with a strip of leather. It knocked softly, 2 notes, as the bucket went down. She felt the line answer through her palms, steady as breath, steady as law finally catching up to what was right. She thought of her mother's careful overflow stone, of her father's neat lines, of the boys she'd walked to the ridge and the way mercy had made her visible to friend and enemy at once. "Tell him the book is only a start," she said. "Tell him the keeping comes next." Tom did, and Whitehawk nodded, a promise returning to the person who spoke it. By month's end, the fence stood straight, the garden edged green, and the ledger's shares and hours pages had more names than the wedding registry the church hardly used. People remembered to bring their own buckets. They remembered to thank the ground and the hands that minded it. Sheriff Dugan stopped looking at his boots when talk turned hard. Preacher Jacobs found that his tremor calmed while he counted cups. Even the pale mare eased into a habit of nudging Clara's shoulder just before dawn, as if to say, "Bucket now." Clara closed the ledger one quiet night and listened to Dry Mesa breathe, the rope's soft thrum, the far-off laughter from the schoolyard, the hush of riders on the ridge settling into their blankets. She rested her palm on the stone charm, warm from use. Mercy had not made her weak. It had made the valley strong enough to hold.